Well, thanks for coming along tonight, where Senator Don Farrell makes a very welcome first appearance at the Sydney Institute. He's well known to many of you because of his very senior role in the Albanese government as the Minister for Trade and Tourism and some other things, and Deputy Leader of the government in the Senate. I'll just go briefly to his background. He was elected to the Senate in 2007 and stayed there till 2013, re-elected again in 2016. He held ministerial positions in the previous Labor government. His background, as he puts in his declaration in the Parliamentary Handbook, a waiter, something worker, I can't read it, what is that? A mail sorter and a shop assistant. And also the founder of Farrell Wines, which is quite a good thing to found, I would say. And so he's very welcome here today, but of course also a very senior official in the Shop Distributor and Allied Employees Association for quite a few years. And so the Minister's here tonight to talk about Australia's trade, a report from over the last 6 months. Many welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you.
Just grab a little glass of water. It's been a thirsty day. All right. Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, Gerard. I should acknowledge that the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I bumped into Gerard at a bookshop in Melbourne some years ago, and in fact he invited me on that occasion to come and speak to the Sydney Institute. And of course it's taken all this time to get that organised, but he just appeared on Insiders, which you don't seem to appear so frequently on anymore. But I always read Gerard's column in the Australian. I don't always agree with it, and he's probably not flavour of the month in certain sections of the Labor Party. But I do find that the forensic way in which he examines his topics, you always find out something that you didn't know before. And I think it's quite a fascinating read, so I always make sure I do it. I'd also mention my old friend John Fernan. Gerard mentioned I was an official of the Shop Assistants Union. I started in 1976, which is about the time John would have started. Of course, he went on to much bigger and better things, being a barrister in New South Wales, but it's great to see you here. I come from Adelaide, and when I was young, I'm going to talk a little bit about my father for Gerard's benefit in a moment, but when he came to Sydney as a young person, of course, it was always so much more exciting than South Australia. And my father was an accountant, and we'd drive across the Hay Plain. He was a chain smoker, and we used to do it in May, so the windows were up. And we'd finally get to Sydney, and the big attraction in Sydney was our reward for a couple of days in the car. Was doing all the exciting things that you do in Sydney, and that included the park just across the road. I don't know whether we can see it, but Luna Park. Interestingly enough, Luna Park actually started in South Australia. It started on Glenelg Beach, but when they wanted to open on Sunday, of course, the strict Methodist rules of the Playford government meant that they couldn't open on Sunday. So Mr. Luna Park moved to New South Wales and set himself up over there. And I was 5 years of age. I convinced my father that I was old enough to go on the Dodgems. And back then, there weren't too many health and safety rules. So out there I went on the 5 years of age on the Dodgems, and somebody came and hit me from behind, and I smashed my lip into the wheel, the wooden wheel, and ended up at the Royal North Shore Hospital with about 5 or 6 stitches that night. So always an abiding memory of my first visit to Sydney. And of course, the other thing I remember is the building down here, the AMP building. It used to be the tallest building in Sydney, and another one of the things that we always did was to go up to the top there. So I will talk a little bit, as I say, about the Shop Assistants Union. The Shop Assistants Union is known to be a right-wing union in this country, but during the war, the Second War, the communists in South Australia, it's not a very familiar term anymore to most people, but the communists got control of the Shop Assistants Union. And the only branch of the Shop Assistants Union that was taken over by the communists was the South Australian branch. And in 1953, my father assisted what would then be called the Groupers to get that union back from the communists and in the safe hands of the right wing of the Labor movement, where it stayed for the period since then. And that was a year before I was born. My father went on to be the treasurer of the Democratic Labor Party in South Australia, which was the organisation that resulted from the split in the Labor parties in the 50s. And we grew up in a family where every night you would sit together for a meal. Well, nobody does that anymore. And he would talk to us, perhaps a better description is lecture us on the day's political events. And of course, that was how I sort of built up my knowledge of politics, from every night getting a lecture from him about the state of the world. They talk about young people being socialist when they're young, having a heart, and being conservative when they're old, having a head. Well, I started conservative and I've remained conservative for all of that time. The world might have changed, but I've stayed pretty much the same. And I guess one of the wonders of the current Albanese government is just how well myself and Anthony Albanese get on, and we have an ambition to create a long-term, stable Labor government, and I'm very happy to be working with Anthony to achieve that. And of course, he offered me the trade portfolio. I hadn't had the portfolio in opposition, but in government he offered me that position, and I grabbed it with both hands, because having worked in the Labor movement, both unions and the Labor Party for the previous 46 years, I felt this was the perfect job for me, and I very much appreciated the faith which the Prime Minister has put in me in what is now a very difficult period of time in terms of trade. At about 7:30 Sydney time tonight, our Prime Minister will meet with the President of China, and of course one of the topics they'll be discussing is some of what we describe as trade blockages between Australia and China, with a view to trying to resolve some of the disputes that we have with that country. Yesterday, I made.
We get you to talk a bit more into the mic.
Into the mic, yes, closer. Here we go. How about that? Does that sound? Yeah, actually, yeah, I can tell that that's a lot better. Yesterday, I addressed the APEC study group in Melbourne, and is that too loud now? No, that's fine. Okay. I had the opportunity to address the group about the Albanese's government's trade agenda, and we basically have 4 guiding principles in the trade area. The first one is diversification, and then secondly, defending a rules-based system, particularly using the resources of the World Trade Organization. And then diversifying the range of products that we sell, and particularly looking forward to the renewable industry. And finally, making sure that the benefits of trade are shared fairly throughout the Australian community. The current American trade ambassador, Catherine Tai, describes that as being worker-centric trade agreements, and we all are familiar with some of the problems that the United States has had in terms of its free trade agreements post the 2016 election of President Trump. Why are we talking about diversification? Well, as we've seen over the last couple of years, we've had all of our eggs in the China basket, and that's proved to be very problematic. We're not the only country to experience trade blockages with China. There's lots of other countries who now, I think, see that diversification is the way to go in terms of your trading arrangements. And so what we've done since we've come into power is try and look at additional places where we can sell our products. The 4 items that were the subject of trade blockages in particular were wine, barley, meat, and of all things, crayfish. They were all banned, and they valued at about $20 billion a year of lost trade that we used to deal with China. Now, there is a paradox in our relationship with China, because despite all of those trading blockages, China continues to be, by a long way, our largest trading partner. A combination of shortages of goods, high prices, and the war in Ukraine, Russia, has pushed up the value of those products to record levels. So, on the one hand, China is stopping us purchasing, China has stopped buying a range of the products I just mentioned before. On the other hand, they're buying and paying more for a range of other products. Part of our strategy with China is to try and stabilise the relationship, and of course that's part of that process will begin tonight when our Prime Minister and the Chinese President meet. But we have a strategy to try and diversify, and when we came into office, there were 2 agreements that had been negotiated. One involved the United Kingdom, the other one involved India. Both of those agreements offered new opportunities for Australian companies to sell their products into a range of companies at a lower price. So we became more competitive in those markets. Unfortunately, the previous government didn't get around to approving those agreements before they lost office, and so that job has fallen to me. So on the first opportunity that we had, which was in early August, we resubmitted the agreements to the Treaties Committee. So the process is the Treaties Committee has to examine them, give Australians an opportunity to say yes or no as to whether they want this agreement, bring back a report. That report will come down in the next couple of days on both the UK and India, and on the basis that the committee will give the tick to both of those agreements, I've got legislation ready to go next Monday, and hopefully by the end of next week, Australia will have approved both those new agreements. So a very positive step in our relationship with those countries, and obviously giving huge benefits to Australian producers in terms of new opportunities, so that we begin that diversification process. In addition to that, we've got two new agreements that we're negotiating. One with the European Union, and the other one with the United States and a range of other countries in our region. The EU one is important. We started that process in 2018, so 4 years ago. We actually started before New Zealand, but because of our problems with, in particular, France over the issue of submarines, New Zealand was able to get the jump on us, and they now have an agreement with the EU, and we're playing a little bit of catch-up. Why is the EU so important? Well, just like us, they've realised that they've had all the eggs in the China basket, and when you look at the issue of particularly critical minerals, which are going to be essential for the electric vehicles of the future, they want to make sure that there's a range of countries that they can purchase from, and not simply be limited to buying product from China. So they're looking to Australia. It's obviously a huge market, 450 million people, an economy worth $23 trillion. We were able to very quickly resolve the issue of the submarines. It was expensive, almost $6 billion and we didn't get a single submarine. But also the other impediment was the attitude of the previous government to the issue of climate change. And of course, on coming to office, the government made a commitment in respect of 2030 and then also 2050, and that was very well received in Europe amongst the countries of the EU. Again, I'm confident that by midway through next year, we will be able to negotiate and finalise an agreement with the EU that'll give us access to a massive new market. There are still some difficult issues to be resolved. This issue of geographic indicators. The Italians and the Greeks are particularly keen to get some of the terms that they consider to be theirs restricted from use in Australia, and that's obviously a difficult issue for Australian producers. But we're working through all of those problems, and we'll continue to negotiate in good faith. One of the big advantages that we've got, for instance, that New Zealand didn't have, is this issue of critical access to critical minerals. When I was in the United States a few weeks ago, the Americans passed what they called the Inflation Reduction Act. don't think it has that much to do with inflation, but that's what it's called. That act allows Americans who buy an electric vehicle a tax concession. So it's a deduction, about $3,750 tax concession if you buy an electric vehicle. But there's a number of conditions before you can get that discount. And one of them is that you have to buy a product that's made with critical minerals that comes from countries with a free trade agreement with the United States. Of course, Australia is one of those. We have a free trade agreement with the United States. So that means that we're in the box seat to sell our critical minerals into the United States. And there's a number of people here from the minerals areas. Of course, they will tell you there's a number of interesting things about critical minerals. If you were looking at an iron ore mine, you'd look out, and as far as the eye could see, you would see iron ore. Critical minerals are quite different. They tend to be deeper down, they're smaller, and of course what that means that they won't last as long in terms of how long the mine might last. So you're going to have to spend more money to get the minerals out, and then you're going to have to keep reinvesting in new mines. The agreement that we're now negotiating with the United States, called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, again gives us an opportunity to firstly re-engage the United States. After the 2016 election, it became virtually impossible for either the Republicans or the Democrats to support free trade agreements. And so an agreement that had been initiated by President Obama, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was never approved by the United States. This Indo-Pacific Agreement gives the United States an opportunity to re-engage in Asia, because nearly all of the ASEAN countries have signed up to the agreement, and gives us an opportunity to discuss with the Americans about greater investment, particularly in our mining industries. So there are a range of agreements that either we're in the process of implementing through the Parliament, or in the process of negotiating. And I think both of those new agreements, the EU agreement and the Indo-Pacific Agreement, we'd hope to finalise those by the middle of next year. But both of those agreements, of course, have the opportunity to deal with what we call the transition. So we've in the past been a conventional energy superpower. We export huge amounts of coal, of gas to our trading partners. The world is decarbonising. That process will not be an easy process. People it rolls off the tongue, net zero by 2050. In fact, it's going to be a difficult process. One of the things that we need to ensure is that in dealing with that transition, that we continue to invest in the conventional energy sources long enough so that by the time we can get to the renewable energies, that we continue to have a stable energy system. And in all of the discussions I've just had in Japan and Korea, the two things that those countries are talking about are hydrogen and critical minerals, and both of those are going to be essential. if we're going to get to that stage of decarbonisation. Now, there's a couple of things about hydrogen. Of course, nobody's perfected as yet how you might use that in our current energy system. And if you think about gas, if you transport gas from Australia to Japan, for instance, it's transported as a liquid, so you cool it down. You transport it at minus 150 degrees, roughly. To liquefy hydrogen, you have to reduce the temperature to 250 degrees, so 100 degrees cooler. So just developing the technology to transport those that hydrogen. The other thing about hydrogen is that the molecules are smaller than a gas molecule. So you can't use existing gas pipelines to simply replace gas with hydrogen. You're going to have to build a whole new system. And of course, what does that mean? Well, that means a whole lot more investment. And one of the objectives out of all of our free trade agreements will be to try and boost the level of investment. So just as we've been a conventional energy superpower, we become a renewable superpower into the future. And as I says, that combination of hydrogen and the critical minerals put us in a very, very strong position to ensure that we're going to benefit into the future, as we've done in conventional energy. We hope to be able to do the same in the energy of the future. The other thing that, just on that topic, we recently negotiated the world's first green economy agreement with Singapore. So Singapore is leading the way in terms of decarbonising their economy. There's a company called Sun Cable that's currently in the process of negotiating with Singapore about building a connection between Darwin, where they'll use solar panels to produce electricity. That's then sent all the way to Singapore. So not only will be supplying that new energy in a traditional way, we're going to be if this comes off, and there's every indication that it will, we'll be the main supplier of renewable energy to Singapore into the future. We've also established a task force, the 2040 task force, to bring government, industry, unions, community representatives together to think about opportunities in trade, but also to make sure that we bring the community along with us. In the past, there has sometimes been a sense that not everybody has shared in the benefits of free trade agreements, that some sectors have suffered more than others. And so part of my task is to make sure that as we negotiate these new agreements, as we bring them into force, that we explain it to the Australian community and that we bring them along with us. And again, that's something that the Biden administration is doing in the United States, and that's what we want to do over here. The other area that is an opportunity for us is to embrace First Nation voices and to ensure that they participate in the trading arrangements into the future. And there are a number of agreements in place that give the opportunity to First Nations peoples to be involved in that trade in those trading arrangements. So I suppose that's a brief summary of what we've done in 6 months. It's been a busy 6 months. We, within 2 days of becoming the Trade Minister, the Prime Minister took us up to Indonesia, and we started the ball rolling there in trying to build stronger trading relationships. And I understand at the G20 this week, the Indonesian President wants the Australian Prime Minister to be standing right next to him, because we were one of the first countries to, or we were the first country to commit to attending the G20. So thank you for the opportunity for going through those trading arrangements, and very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So many thanks to the Minister, and also I should say thanks to King & Wood Mallison for providing this great facility today with views over Sydney Harbour, which the Minister's well used. So we come to questions and discussion, and also there'll be people on Zoom who may want to come in. You've obviously been extremely busy from your first trip, and you've been through South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Britain, you've been in the US, have you? New Zealand, and then you're also Minister for Tourism. So you must be one of the busiest people in the Cabinet, without question. And also, as you know, trade's a very technical issue. You've got to have a very technical mind to sit through those discussions. So what are you also doing as the Special Minister for State? What's that all about? Haven't you got enough to do?
Well, Special Minister of State is where all the bodies are buried, and it's a really terrific portfolio to have, and I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister left me with it. The Special Minister of State looks after a number of things, elections, so I'm in the process of making some changes to the Referendums Act to facilitate the referendum on the Indigenous voice. But more particularly, it deals with the issue of how we conduct elections. And I'm planning to review the way in which we conduct elections and the rules around them, to try and increase the level of transparency in elections. At the moment, you can donate something in the vicinity of $15,000 or less and not have to declare it. We're planning to reduce that figure to $1,000. At the moment, sometimes it's months or years before you find out who's donated to elections. We're planning to introduce real-time disclosures. So within 7 days of an individual or a company making a donation, you'll be able to look up on a website and see who's donating to which candidates. Truth in advertising, it's a law that was introduced in South Australia before the last election. We're going to try and encourage politicians and political parties to tell the truth in elections and have a... It's not easy. Do that. But I guess the other thing that we're also looking at is how we regulate the amount of people, the amount of money that, in particular, rich individuals can spend in an election. Because I think there's a sense in the community that if you're rich and you're participating in the political process, you can, buy election results. We saw that in the 2019 election, particularly with Clive Palmer. Tens of millions of dollars spent in that election. Didn't have any political success in the sense of electing candidates, but he did ensure that Bill Shorten didn't win that election. He's done the same in the last election. Got one victory in Victoria, but it suggests that, if you're rich and you're prepared to make a financial commitment, you can get some election results. And of course, we've seen it with the TILs, the figures that came out last week about the amount of money that the TIL candidates spent in that election. So I think there's an appetite in the Australian people to regulate the amount of money people can spend on elections, and I'm going to be trying to see whether or not we can get some electoral form that makes the Australian electoral system fairer and more transparent.
Thank you. Would that include regulation on the amount of money that organisations who are spending members' money is able to be deployed in the interests of their political objectives?
Look, I think if we're going to go down this track, there has to be a regulation across. I assume you're talking about unions there, but look, there's going to have to be, I think, some sensible discussion. I don't want to preempt the discussion at this stage, but I think we're getting to the point where there needs to be a regulation on how much people can spend in elections. Many of the state governments have done this, and I want to try and progress that issue.
Look, thank you for that. In your discussions with some of our partners, particularly, say, Japan and South Korea, do they show any interest or concern over the behaviour of Australian trade unions, which from time to time could endanger the critical supply of various products to Japan and Korea?
Well, I was with about 100 Japanese business people last night at the Japanese embassy, and I have to say nobody raised that particular topic with me. They might have been thinking it, they just didn't raise it. There was a few other issues they raised, but not that one.
I've got a question from Canberra, actually. What are your thoughts on trade diversification and the role of stronger bilateral trade agreements?
Look, I don't think we have to limit ourselves to bilateral arrangements. Obviously, bilateral arrangements are good. We've got, got one with the United Kingdom. We've got one with India, got one with New Zealand, and they're all good agreements that are delivering for Australian business and Australian workers. But on the other hand, we want to negotiate an agreement with the EU, and that's obviously a large number of countries. And in terms of our negotiations with the United States over IPEF, 13 or 14 countries in that agreement. So I don't think we should limit ourselves to bilateral agreements. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, another really good agreement, has got a whole range of partners in that. So, we need to look at, what other countries are prepared to do. If that means a multilateral agreement, then that's what we should be looking at. If it's a bilateral agreement, well, they're good too.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for sharing some of your youthful experiences in Sydney as well. I wanted to ask you about critical minerals, because obviously there is an opportunity for us, in a sense, to get back into the car industry, at least in the battery part of it. But we've tended to always fall short of being able to value add, so we end up exporting vast amounts of the original minerals but not doing anything else to them. Yep. Do you think there's an opportunity for us actually to value add and truly make use of what you say is a limited amount of those minerals?
Look, I couldn't agree more with that proposition, and with my export finance hat on, we're trying to encourage companies not only just to dig the product out of the ground, but then to value add it, and things like turning lithium into lithium oxide. I mean, it's only a relatively small process, but it's an additional part along the way. Anthony Albanese went to the last government saying, last election, saying we do want to build things in this country again. I personally think it was a scandal that we let Holden and Toyota leave our shores. I think there were actually national security reasons why we should have a car industry. We'd have to start from scratch again, unfortunately, because we no longer have a car industry. But I know Ed Husick, our industry minister, is thinking about ways in which we can do that value adding. And I think where the opportunity arises, where we think we can be competitive, on a world scale, then I think we have to get back into these industries.
Minister, is the government developing any particular strategy in relation to Indonesia? I know we have an existing economic relationship agreement with Indonesia, but we are sitting next to a country of 280 million people with one of the fastest growing economies in the world, which will be 7th or 5th largest in the world quite shortly. We have enormous geographic advantage, and yet we have almost nobody who speaks Indonesian. We do not teach it in our schools. We have very few Indonesian students here. And basically, we're sitting, frankly, on top of a huge gold mine and seem to show a complete inability to take advantage.
I couldn't agree more. So I was elected by the caucus to be a minister on the Tuesday. On the Wednesday, I was sworn in by the Governor-General as the Trade Minister. On the Thursday, I was on a flight with the Prime Minister to Indonesia, where we met with the President. In fact, coincided with my birthday, and so I'm one of the few people that have had happy birthday sung to them by the Indonesian President in the palace. I think the Prime Minister understands just how important Indonesia is. You've mentioned the reason: population of 270 million people, about to become the 5th largest economy in the world. I think if we're honest about it, the shift in focus to Asia started under the Hawke-Keating government. We changed our focus to look to Indonesia, but after Prime Minister Keating lost, then we lost that focus. I think under this government, you'll find that we are refocusing on Indonesia. They, of course, are very interested in our critical minerals. They have some ambitions to be leaders in the electric car industry. So obviously we can have some discussions with them. But look, I think there's a whole range of areas where we can improve our trading relationship with Indonesia, and it's one of the things I'm going to try and do.
Minister, going on from that, you spoke about diversity, and one of the lessons probably from our fallout with China and COVID has been that we have probably been too dependent on thinking of China as our golden mountain, to reverse the metaphor. There's been discussion in the last few days about it would be better if we did diversify more. So we'd have to build relations better with a lot of our Southeast Asian neighbours. What are the focuses in that, in terms of who? But also trade is about they need what we have, that sort of thing. So what are the areas that will grow with that kind of development with our neighbours?
Yeah, so one of the areas I didn't particularly focus on, but in the last week we have renegotiated our ASEAN agreement. And we've modernised that agreement. We've included things like the digital economy into that agreement. we've got a population of 25, 26 million, and yet we produce food capable of feeding 70 million people. I think what do we do well? Well, we produce lots of things like wheat and beef and sheep. We can be better at that. We can do what we currently do well, we can do better. And I think as you get a rising middle class in particularly the ASEAN countries, then the opportunity is there to sell more of our good product. We have a good reputation up there. They like our food. Just in agriculture alone, I think we can increase our sales. And as their standard of living rises, then we can meet that with good Australian product. And we can, build our own industries so that, we're producing more food. I mean, critical minerals will be important. Hydrogen. The difficulty of transporting hydrogen is an issue, so we might have to produce ammonia. So they're all sort of opportunities. And I think if you look around when I was in Japan and Korea, both of those countries are looking to Australia to provide the renewable energy for the future. We should have got into the solar panel business all those years ago. We developed the technology for it, but it went offshore. In particular, it went to China. There's going to be new technologies. Let's hope that the next time we take the opportunities and we get that value add in Australia.
Just while we get that across, just on that issue, I mean, is there a security concern that our alternative energy is dependent on China with solar panels and wind turbines? If that's the future of our energy, then we're dependent on China for our energy. Is that a concern?
Look, the whole world is looking at diversification at the moment. We have to look at ways of ensuring that we continue to be able to sort of develop our renewable industries, and part of that process will be looking at other methods to access those products. We believe in diversification. There are now opportunities to do that, and we'll be looking at those into the future.
I want to extend this issue because essentially our coal exports are the export of electricity. We deny ourselves the right to produce electricity, and yet we sell it to an economy predominantly in China, which doesn't love us, doesn't care for us, and has demonstrated its preparedness to take punitive action when it thinks it's in its interests. That seems to me to be a fundamental paradox in our approach to trade and to the management of our own economy.
No, look, you did right. It's a paradox. On the one hand, China is our largest trading partner. China represents more sales than Japan, Korea, and the United States put together. And they seem to adopt a position where if they need a product and Australia is the only source of that product, well, they continue to buy it. But if they can get a product from another source and they don't like something that we've said or done, then they introduce trade blockages. We want a stable relationship with China, and we want to see the normalisation of relations. At the moment, we're taking actions in the World Trade Organisation in respect of wine and barley. We would prefer not to have to do that. We would prefer to have sensible negotiations with China in order to resolve these issues. But at the moment, that's the only avenue. So tonight, obviously, we hope that we start the process of normalisation of relations, and that the issues that we have with China, our largest trading partner, are resolved by negotiation rather than disputation.
Final question. You spoke about our discussions with Britain about formalising that agreement. Is there any conflict between that, ex-Brexit, and our discussions with the European Union, or can the nation of Australia overcome that kind of division in Europe?
Look, there's no conflict, and we were very quick off the mark to negotiate a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. In all of my discussions with the Europeans, they've not once said, "Look, there's a problem because you've got a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom." Like us, I think they've realised that there's been a problem with having all of your eggs in the China basket. They want to diversify. They want to reduce their reliance on China for critical minerals. We're the world's largest or second largest supplier or have reserves of those critical minerals. And, they want to do business with us. They like us. They, understand us by and large. And I think all of the indications I've had is that, while there are a couple of issues outstanding, we will get an agreement with them in good time.
Okay, many thanks. So it's great to get Don Farrell here. We did meet in the bookshop in Melbourne on a Sunday morning and had a discussion with people walking around us, as I recall. It was a very interesting discussion. And we were hoping to have him very soon, but of course the last 2.5 years have been difficult for anyone running a public forum like we do. So it's great to have you here as the First Labor Minister to address one of our public forums of this kind with questions and answers. We had our annual dinner last night with the Deputy PM, and this is the first of a ministerial meeting we've had. So it's great that you're here. You have obviously a hugely diverse and demanding job, as you've indicated. Tonight you've been through trade, you've spoke about Special Minister of State. There's also tourism, being your Deputy Leader of the Government and the Senate. So it's a terrific workload, and we're very pleased that you came here tonight. Gave us a challenging paper, very interesting paper, and took questions from us here and some people on Zoom. So we'll have you back again in the future, but for tonight, thank you and well done. Thank you.